that are a sign of Alzheimer's disease. And Dr. Alzheimer himself saw these back in the early 1900s, and the disease was named because of his discovery. And it's sort of like strands of protein from an old sausage maker coming out and then ending up in these protein blobs in your brain. It's abnormal, shouldn't be that. What's this?
Chicago.
That's Chicago. And in 1993, the Chicago Health and Aging Project got started. And what they did is they rounded up lots of people in Chicago, and they said, what do you eat? What are you eating for breakfast? What's your lunch? What's your dinner? What are your snacks? Write it all down. And they tracked people's diets year after year, and then they tracked who stayed mentally clear and who didn't. And the first thing that they keyed in on was something I knew all about. When I was a kid in Fargo, my mother had 5 children, and we would run down to the kitchen in the morning, and she would be cooking bacon. And she would take a fork and stick it in the fry pan and pull the strips of bacon out, and then put them onto sort of paper towels that she put there to cool down. And when all the bacon was out of the pan, you had this hot bacon grease left. And that's good bacon grease. You don't want to just throw that away. So my mother would carefully pick up the hot pan and pour it into a jar to save it. And she's going to filter out all the chunks. Did your mother do this too? Yeah. That jar of bacon grease didn't go in the refrigerator. She just put it on the shelf. Because she knew that when bacon grease cools down, what happens to it? It solidifies, it hardens. And that is a sign that it is just loaded with saturated fat. Saturated fat, that's the one that does what to your cholesterol? It makes it go up, right? But it also may be affected, it may affect the brain. But bacon is not the number one source. The number one source of saturated fat is dairy, especially cheese, and meat is number 2. So some people in Chicago were not eating that much bacon and dairy and other sources of saturated fat. So their daily saturated fat intake, about 13 grams. There were other people in Chicago who ate a lot more, almost twice as much, 25 grams. And all the researchers did is they said, who's getting Alzheimer's disease here? And here are the numbers. I wanted to show it to you. Okay. So, if you are in the high saturated fat group, whether it's from cheese or bacon or sausage or chicken or salmon or anything, your risk is doubled or more compared to the people who generally avoid it. So add it up. 2 eggs, 3 grams. 1 strip of bacon, 1 gram of saturated fat. And do you know anyone who eats 1 strip of bacon? You know what I'm talking about. Chicken thigh, even without the skin, that's about 4.5 grams. Glass of whole milk, another 4.5 grams. Pizza for 1, 12 grams. Do you know anybody who eats these foods? Everybody's eating these foods. Lots of people are eating these foods. But if I add them up, I'm in that high risk group. That's 25 grams of saturated fat just from that alone. Well, that's not so cheerful. Okay, well, you remember that condition, mild cognitive impairment. This is the one where you're still yourself, but your memory is starting to sputter a little bit. You go to a grocery store, and you see somebody, I know that person. And you kind of duck into the next aisle, try and remember their name, and of course there's someone there you ought to know. This is mild cognitive impairment. Researchers in Finland brought in a group of people, over 1,000 people, and the average age was 50. They didn't have mild cognitive impairment yet, but what they did is they tracked their fat intake, just like in Chicago. And some people ate relatively little, some people ate a lot, and then they looked at who started to lose their memory. And here's what they found. So, in other words, you see this? It's not just a question of whether you get Alzheimer's disease or not. It's also whether you just have old age memory lapses on a daily basis, okay? Now what about that gene, that ApoE epsilon 4 allele, the one that condemns you to Alzheimer's disease? Now let's redo the study looking only at those people. If we limit the results to just the people who have that gene, some of them had relatively low saturated fat intake, some had high saturated fat intake. Let's have a look. Here's the numbers. Okay. The difference is huge. Even if you have the gene that says you're at higher risk for Alzheimer's, if you don't eat the bad fat, your risk of memory problems is cut in this study by about 80%. And this is my most important message. Genes are not destiny. There are genes that are dictators. There are genes that say blue eyes or brown hair. You can't argue with those genes. They're dictators, they give orders, and you're going to have blue eyes, brown hair, whatever it is. But most genes are more like committees. They make suggestions. Like the diabetes genes are that way. If you've got genes for diabetes, you see it run in families. Does that mean everybody's got it? Or if you change your diet and exercise, can you put that off or maybe not have it? Absolutely. Cancer genes are often that way. Do you know there are genes for lung cancer? In some cases, the way they work is they make it harder for you to eliminate carcinogens that you inhaled. So if that's what the gene is, and you're going to end up with lung cancer because you can't eliminate carcinogens, what if you don't smoke? And you never take those carcinogens into your body in the first place? The gene can be irrelevant. So there are genes for Alzheimer's disease, but could those be genes that simply change the way your body handles saturated fat and the way it affects the brain chemistry, but you're not eating the saturated fat, so the gene becomes irrelevant? Genes are not destiny. Are you with me? Okay. All right, so, oh yeah, what's that? There's fat in there too. What's it called? Trans fats? That's right. Some people in Chicago know what a donut is. And some people eat not too much trans fat, some people eat a larger amount. And the researchers look at the same thing, but now we're not looking at saturated fat anymore. We're not looking at animal fat. Now we're looking at those saturated vegetable oils. And here's the numbers. Ooh. Don't eat that stuff. Okay, so as scary as that may be, this is really optimistic. What it means is I've got a measure of control that I didn't know I had. If I avoid those risky foods, I can cut my risk dramatically. Okay, we're just getting started though. Why would these fats affect the brain? The shorter answer is we're not entirely sure, but researchers at Kaiser Permanente did an interesting study. They drew blood samples from a large group of people, about 10,000 people. And some of them had relatively low cholesterol levels, some higher, and highest. And then they looked at the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And it went right along with cholesterol. If you had a lower cholesterol, fairly low risk. If you had a really high cholesterol, you had the highest risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And so the researchers said, it looks like whatever is good for the heart is good for the brain. And what's bad for the heart is bad for the brain too. By the way, the cholesterol levels that they took were when people were 40 years old. And it predicted their risk of Alzheimer's 3 decades later. So it's never too early to start a change. And never too late either, I'm going to say. Okay, so I live in Chicago and I'm eating all these bad foods. I got a high risk of Alzheimer's. Can I change my diet? Can I? Can I get rid of some of that stuff? Okay, let's see. Out with a whole milk. Who's ever tasted almond milk? Is it any good?
No.
It's okay. It doesn't have any saturated fat. So, all right, I just cut my risk. I knocked out 4.5 grams of saturated fat. If the statistics in Chicago apply to me, that's good. Is there something else I can get rid of? Let's see. We can get rid of the bacon. We'll have this kind of a liberal interpretation of the original. You know what I mean? I'm going to get rid of the eggs, we'll have a bowl of oatmeal, and get rid of the chicken, have a nice vegetable sandwich, and let's see how I'm doing. I'm doing better. If the statistics in Chicago apply to me by just knocking out the sources of saturated fat, I'm progressively reducing my risk. Is there anything more I can do?
Pizza.
What?
Pizza.
I get rid of pizza? All right. Get rid of that one. We'll have the vegan pizza. Let's see how I do. Well, I don't know, because nobody in Chicago eats that well.
That's good.
Well, anyway, as a matter of fact, there are some places where people do eat that well. In Loma Linda, California, there are many people who are Adventists whose church says you got to be healthy and really pushes plant-based eating to a degree, and many people do that. And that set up an interesting study. This is a group of, this is how many, can you see that red line? This is the number of people who stayed free of dementia. It's gradually fallen down. These are the meat eaters, and those are the vegetarians. So, by the way, these are not necessarily vegans, but just avoiding meat. appears to protect the brain as well. Okay. So what else is in those plaques? We've been talking about saturated fat and cholesterol leading to protein buildup in the brain, but there's something else in those plaques. There's iron, and there's copper, in addition to the protein and cholesterol. Iron in your brain, did you know that? Well, you know, you need little bits of iron. Iron makes hemoglobin that carries oxygen around in your body, and some of it gets into the brain. And iron is a very reactive metal. If you have a cast iron pan, and one day you remember that you had a picnic, and you left your cast iron pan on the picnic table a week ago, and it rained, what happened to the cast iron pan? It rusted. That's oxidation. Copper, I have a nice shiny copper penny, but as the years go by, does it stay shiny forever? No, it kind of darkens up. That's oxidation too. So copper and iron are transitional metals that gradually oxidize, and that very same thing happens in your body. The tiny molecules of iron and copper oxidize, and when they do, they produce these malicious chemicals called free radicals. And the free radicals are like sparks. They tear holes in your arteries, in your skin, in the connections from one brain cell to the next. So if I keep the iron intake and copper intake in my diet limited, just enough for my needs, but not more, I can repel that free radical damage to a degree. So where's all the copper? How many people in this room have a cast iron pan? Okay, I'm going to say if it's your go-to pan and you're using it every day, you are getting a lot more iron than you would otherwise. Copper pipes, anybody have copper pipes? You know, the water sits in the pipe all night long, and the next morning you fill your coffee maker and you're drinking copper, probably too much. If you were eating meat, or especially liver, you get the mother load of both. You get a day's supply of iron and copper in probably half of one serving. Multiple vitamins are interesting. You know, you do need vitamin B12. If you don't get sun, you need vitamin D. And they throw in some other vitamins that, frankly, you don't need because you're getting them from food. But to make you buy that, they'll say, well, we don't just have that, we also have iron in it. And we have copper in it. And we have all the minerals that you need. And you might say, well, wait a minute. I'm getting enough of all those in my diet anyway. Don't add them to my pill. So they got the message on iron. So the Centrum company makes Centrum Silver for people over the age of 50, realizing they've got plenty of iron already stored up, so they don't add any iron. But they're about 30 years behind the science. They still pack lots of copper in there, not realizing that researchers have linked copper and iron intake to Alzheimer's disease. My suggestion to you is to not take these things. If you are using a multiple vitamin, you can go online and get the brands that say vitamins only, because you're getting the minerals through food. Don't take iron unless your doctor specifically tests you and says that you need it. And don't take copper, same story, unless you specifically need it, because you're getting it in foods. And overdoing it is at least as bad as underdoing it. Make sense? Okay. Another culprit, aluminum. Have you heard about aluminum maybe being a risk factor?
Yes.
The science is still a little bit mixed, but let me show you where it started. In Britain, county water supplies were tested. And the reason they were testing the water is if you stick your cup into a river and have it analyzed, that water doesn't have aluminum in it. And well water typically doesn't have aluminum in it. But when it gets to the water filtration plant, it's a little cloudy and whatever. To get the cloudiness out, they add aluminum. And the aluminum precipitates up the solids, but some of that aluminum might stay in the drinking water unless they get rid of it. So it comes out of your faucet and then you drink it, and you might be just drinking aluminum. So researchers found that some areas had relatively low amounts of aluminum, and some had high amounts of aluminum in the water, and the high aluminum counties had 50% more cases of Alzheimer's compared to the others. So people started looking into aluminum and thinking, is this really a problem? In France, they did studies, found the same thing. Studies in Canada have also suggested that this is an issue. And I have to say, researchers are still fighting out whether it really matters. Here's reasons to take it seriously. In factories where aluminum is used for manufacturing, when there are accidents and people inhale or ingest large amounts of aluminum, it's a clear-cut neurotoxin. There's no question about it. Second, your body does not use aluminum for anything. Your body uses some copper and some iron and some calcium and some magnesium and some sodium. It doesn't use aluminum for anything. It doesn't want it. If you ingest it, your body tries to get rid of it. It treats it like a toxin. So I suggest avoiding it completely. And if it turns out that it was safe, fair enough, you won't have missed anything, but protect yourself. So where is it going to be? It might be in your water. You can contact your local water company or the Environmental Protection Agency if you live in the US, and they can tell you about the aluminum content of your water. If you are unsure, you can have those big tanks of bottled water delivered, or you can get a filter, but the little Brita filter that you snap on will not remove aluminum. You got to get a reverse osmosis filter, the one that goes underneath. So those are the issues. Aluminum, pots and pans. Your spaghetti sauce is stirring for hours and busily eating into the metal of it, and the aluminum is coming straight in. And by the way, if you have a coated pan, I would suggest getting a coated pan where the first layer under the coating is steel, not aluminum. Or if you're getting steel pans, fine, no problems at all, obviously. Like Salad Master, where it's totally steel, there's no aluminum touching the food at all. You can go to the store. There's that baking powder, there's that one right next to it. This one has aluminum, that one doesn't, they cost the same. Real easy to choose. Pizza for one, let's pick on that again. Look at the label. A lot of these frozen pizzas, you'll see aluminum in the cheese topping or in the crust. It's added. These little salt packets, you're at a fast food place and you open up the salt packet, they often have aluminum added to keep it dry. You've got acid stomach. My dad, when he was growing up, he always had acid stomach. He always had a busy career, and he would drink Maalox, not realizing that Maalox stands for magnesium and aluminum hydroxide. You're just drinking an aluminum cocktail. Right next to it in the drugstore, they sell that one. It doesn't have any aluminum in it at all. So you can just choose and avoid it, okay? If you buy a deodorant, it doesn't have aluminum in it. If you buy an antiperspirant, it does, because the aluminum is designed to clog up the little sweat glands so that you don't perspire. It does go through the skin, and it will increase your blood aluminum levels. So, but all the ones that are not called antiperspirants, you can just read the label, and they'll be aluminum free. So it's a lot of things, but once you've read the labels one time, you will then know, and you'll be able to be guided. Is this making sense? Yeah. All right, so having copper, I've been having aluminum, I've been having iron, and all these free radicals are going crazy in my body, like little sparks singeing through my brain. I need a fire extinguisher to put them all out. And that means an antioxidant like vitamin E. Vitamin E is an antioxidant that will take the free radicals, neutralize them, and get them out of harm's way. You'll find vitamin E in spinach. You'll find it in lots of foods, mangoes, and a lot more of it in nuts and seeds, and avocados, which we may be avoiding if we're trying to lose weight. But researchers in Chicago also looked at whether vitamin E could be helpful in contrast to the oils that were harmful. So some people had low vitamin E, and some people had high vitamin E intakes. And I'm going to hypothesize that if free radicals are a part of the damaging process of the brain, then if I am low in vitamin E, I'm at risk. Let's see. There you are. What we're getting is, if you have a diet that's rich in vitamin E, it cuts your Alzheimer's risk by about 50%. So all of these things add together. You don't have to just avoid the fat or have the vitamin E rich foods. You could do it all simultaneously at the same time. It can be risk reducing. So it's in broccoli and spinach and all these foods, much more in the nuts and seeds. And the question is, how much? First point is, have it from foods, not from pills. You can go to a health food store and they've got all kinds of vitamin E that they'd like to sell you. Those don't seem to work in the research studies on Alzheimer's. And the reason probably is, in nature, there are 8 different forms of vitamin E. In a pill, there might be one or there might be two, and they can legally call it vitamin E. The problem is when you take that one form, it suppresses your ability to absorb the others. You want to get them all in the balance that nature had in mind. You see what I'm talking about? We went through this with beta carotene. Beta carotene, the orange pigment. People who consume a lot of orange foods, like carrots and sweet potatoes, have a lot less cancer compared to other people. So researchers said, let's put that to the test. And they picked smokers. Smokers are at high cancer risk. Let's give them beta carotene and see if it protects them. But they didn't ask them to eat carrots, they gave them beta carotene pills. And they were horrified to discover that the people taking the beta carotene pills had more lung cancer than the people who avoided them. It did the opposite. Why? Because when you take a supplement that's just one of many carotenoids, there are hundreds of beta carotene cousins, you take a huge amount of it and it suppresses your ability to absorb the others. And you're actually deficient in antioxidants. So if you take one form of vitamin E, you're leaving out all the others. Instead, get them in the nuts, the seeds, the vegetables, in the way that nature had in mind. So now, by now you're saying, wait a minute, I don't want to eat too many nuts because I'm going to gain weight, which is possible. So here's what you do. The amount you need is about 1 ounce. And that's the amount that goes into your hand. If you pour some nuts into your palm of your hand, before it touches your fingers, that's 1 ounce. And now, most important, don't eat it. Because if you eat it, what you're going to do is fill your hand again. More nuts, you know what I mean, especially those salty smokehouse ones or whatever, salty cashews. That I don't know what they pack in them, but they're addicted to. So don't eat it. What you should do instead, pour them in your hand, crumble them up, and put them on your salad or on your pancakes. Use them as an ingredient, not as a primary food. Use them as a flavoring. You'll get the vitamin E that you need. All right, so I get it. This all sounds like less saturated fat, more vitamin E, more vegetables, more fruits. That sounds like a Mediterranean kind of diet. And it's true in Mediterranean regions, some people do have less Alzheimer's disease. And when I was in college, I think some of my roommates thought they were doing a Mediterranean diet with that kind of stuff. Well, as we were talking about earlier, it's true that people who drink a little bit on a regular basis do have somewhat less risk of Alzheimer's. That J-shaped curve we were talking about in an earlier lecture. But researchers said, well, wait a minute. Alcohol is a neurotoxin. Maybe it's not the alcohol at all. Maybe it's the grape. It's protecting the brain, because grapes have anthocyanins in them. Let's test the grape. So researchers at the University of Cincinnati brought in people. They were all up in years, average age 78. They all had mild cognitive impairment. Their memories were stumbling a bit. And what they did is they asked them to have 1 pint of grape juice every day. So maybe a cup in the morning, a cup at night. And what they found is in 3 months' time, their learning was better compared to a placebo drink, and their ability to recall things was better. That sounds almost too easy. So the theory was it's anthocyanins. That's what gives grapes their purple color. That's also, by the way, what comes out in the fall. When leaves change their colors, they're making anthocyanins, and they come in all different colors. So the researchers said, let's test this again. Let's do it with blueberries. Whole new group of people, average age 76, 1 pint of blueberry juice a day, and they got exactly the same result. So what we think is that the antioxidant effect can protect the brain. So that means fruits and grains and legumes and vegetables, these colorful foods that can really help us. And if you keep in mind, as we were talking about in an earlier lecture, your retina, the human retina, was designed, among other things, to recognize antioxidants. You can see orange, beta-carotene, you can see red lycopene, you can see purple anthocyanins. And the brain always interprets it positively. That's good, add that, that's nice. Your brain never says, oh, I hate the look of those tomatoes. No, nobody ever does that. Our brains are hardwired to be attracted to antioxidants. The problem is now we take those colors and we put them in M&M's bags, and so we don't know what they're going for, but that's the idea. Okay, so the question is, do I need supplements? And the answer is, here's one you do need. If you don't have vitamin B12 in your diet, you won't have protection for your nervous system, particularly your brain. It also plays a role in the health of your blood. And some people will hypothesize that prior to the advent of modern hygiene, bacteria were making the vitamin B12 we need, the bacteria in the soil, or on vegetables, or maybe even on your fingers or in your mouth. You need 2.4 micrograms of B12 a day, and bacteria make it. That's the source. Well, whether that was ever true or not, I'm not sure. Modern hygiene has made that pretty much impossible. Now, meat eaters will get a little bit of B12 because in the cow's intestinal tract, bacteria make it, and some of it gets into meat, some of it gets into milk. But even they can run low because your body has to absorb it, and it has to pull it off of the meat protein. And to do that requires stomach acid that some people don't make very much of. If you're over 50, you might not be making stomach acid. You're on an acid blocker. If you have diabetes, you're on metformin. All these people tend to run low in B12. So the answer is to take a supplement of B12. It's in every multiple vitamin, but it's also just there at the drugstore or the health food store. Get the smallest one that they sell, like 50 micrograms, and take it every day, and you'll be fine. It's not toxic at higher amounts. It doesn't really matter if it's methylcobalamin or cyanocobalamin, they all work. Okay, make sense? The thing to not do is to say, it doesn't seem natural. You know, I only want to have things that are natural. I hate to break it to you, you don't live in nature. You live in New Jersey. And so as a result, let me illustrate. Vitamin D is the same kind of story. Vitamin D is not something you need by mouth at all. Vitamin D comes from sunlight on your skin. And as vitamin D is formed, it helps you absorb calcium from foods. That's its job. Why would anybody ever need a supplement? You wouldn't. Human beings started out in sort of Northeast Africa, where equatorial sunshine ensured that we all had vitamin D all day long. It's not a problem. But some of us have the bad judgment to leave there and go across the Bering Strait and end up in places like Fargo and Trenton. And you just don't feel like going outside, and there's sometimes you just can't. Or you might be here and you're using a sunscreen and you have now defeated the body's ability to make vitamin D. So if you don't live in nature anymore, we have to make up for it. So the vitamin B12 makes up for the bacteria that are no longer part of our lives, and the vitamin D, if you're not getting sunlight, will make up for that too. If you get regular sunshine, like 20 minutes a day on your face and arms, you probably don't need vitamin D. It's easy to get tested though. Okay, sounds swell. Throughout the saturated fat, throughout the trans fats, get plenty of vitamin E. Eat by brightly colored vegetables and fruits. Who eats that way? Well, this is Okinawa. Anybody been there? It's at the very bottom of Japan. And people in Okinawa live longer than anybody else on the planet. And the dietary staple of Okinawa is not fish. It's not rice. What is it? It's sweet potatoes. Huge amounts of sweet potatoes. This is Masu. Masu is the mother of a friend of mine. My friend runs a Japanese restaurant in the US, but she grew up in Okinawa. And Masu is, there she is at 88, and there she is at 102. When you turn 100, they will throw you a party. But there's a whole lot of other people who you have to share it with, because there's lots of people turning 100. Sweet potatoes are good for you. Meat is not their thing. Cheese, ice cream, that is just not their thing. Westernization, McDonald's, KFC, creeping in there just like everywhere else. And so longevity is now starting to come down. But these healthy, simple plant foods have kept that population not only with good longevity, but with good mental function lifelong. So this is Dr. Ellsworth Wareham. He didn't know Masu and she didn't know him, but they had something in common. Apart from the fact that he was driving a destroyer not far from Okinawa, he ate almost the same way that she did. He grew up on a farm in Canada, and he had the job of milking the cows. And when he would bring in a pail of milk, his mother noticed that he would never drink it. He would bring in the milk, he'd let everybody else drink it, he wouldn't touch it. So mother said, Ellsworth, you need milk, why don't you drink the milk? And he would say, I saw where it came from. And then when it came to eggs, it was like even worse. So he wanted simple plant-based foods. He liked vegetables, he liked bread, he liked beans, really simple foods. So from an early life, he was eating very, very, very simply. But he went through medical school, he did a surgical residency, he became quite a well-known surgeon, and did a big tour of duty, a long tour of duty in Japan, in Vietnam. And then there he is being honored by LBJ, and there he is next to Richard Nixon. So anyway, he was quite a well-known chest surgeon. But what was particularly impressive about him was, when he hit 65, the hospital staff said, you're a great surgeon. I don't think you really need to retire. Just stay on staff, as long as you want to. He said, sure, fine. But when I'm 95, I'm going to retire. That's what he did. At age 95, he said to the other surgeons, nobody's going to have confidence in a surgeon who's 95. I got to hang it up. And he said, wait a minute, where are you going? You have more experience than all of us combined. He said, no, guys, no, I've got to retire. I've got to quit. So anyway, there he is, retired, except he still would go out in the morning and do surgery on all of his plants. His most surgically precise yard you've ever seen. Anyway, Dr. Wareham died just several months ago. And I believe he was 102, 104, something like that. Mentally clear, the nicest man you've ever seen, all lifelong. Just thanks to these very simple foods that kept him healthy. Okay, it's not all food. Exercise is part of it too. Yes, you know it's true. So physical activity protects the brain. University of Illinois, they brought in 120 people. These were older adults. And they asked them to take a brisk walk 3 times a week to see if it would help their memory. And it turned out that it reversed brain shrinkage, especially in the hippocampus, which is Latin for seahorse. Who's had a respiratory today? It's so good. So the hippocampus had been shrinking and started to get expanded as a result of the exercise, and it improved memory. Now think about this. You're exercising, you're getting up, you're moving around. What's your heart doing? It's pumping faster, right? You're taking in oxygen so that your muscles get more oxygen, but so does your brain. So you're getting circulation to your brain. You're getting the oxygen to your brain. You're washing the toxins out, which it doesn't happen when you're in the lazy one. But you get out and your brain can benefit from that. So how do you do it? Here's what I do. I arrive at the airport as late as possible, carrying massively heavy luggage and just run for the plane. I do that 3 times a week. I get my cardio and my weight-bearing exercise. I encourage you to do the same. That's not the way they did it at the University of Illinois. They had a completely different plan, and it was a 10-minute walk for the first week, 3 times a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, 10 minutes. And then the next week, you're going to add 5 minutes. So a 15-minute walk, Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, whatever it is, until you reach 40 minutes. And once you're at 40 minutes, 3 times a week, and by the way, this is not a trudge, a brisk walk. So enough so that you're pushing, but not so fast that you can't speak. And if you're doing a brisk walk, 40 minutes, 3 times a week, that is the level shown to reverse brain shrinkage. Can you do more? Sure. The more the better, as long as you're healthy enough to do it. But a 40-minute brisk walk 3 times a week is more than most people do, and it's great for your brain. Now, it's not just physical exercise. You have heard about mental exercise being helpful. It's still controversial, but it started out, actually all my Canadian friends, that's where it started. Many people in Canada speak 2 languages. And it turned out that people who speak 2 languages actually have cognitive decline about 5 years later than everybody else. And if you speak 3 languages, even better. 4, even better. It's the circuitry is just being used that much more. And if you use it, hopefully you don't lose it. So I am one who thinks that intellectual exercises are very good. You want cognitive things, especially related to words. So documentaries, newspapers, you remember those? Those are important, good to read them. Here's the one that I read every morning. I encourage you to have a good look at it. Very important, memorize that. Crosswords, anything that relates to words and verbal skills is really important. And I have to say, years ago, I was noticing something about words. I was sitting in a lecture that Dean Ornish gave, and Dean is one of my real heroes because he's just revolutionized heart disease research, and then he's dug into cancer research and many, many things, very innovative. But in his lecture, he was making the point that we want social support. And what he said was, if I focus too much on myself, if I focus on I will be ill. But if I take advantage of the support of other people, if I focus on the we, I will be well. So he was making a good point that we should have lots of social support, and that's good. But while he was making that good point, my brain was saying, well, wait a minute. This is probably good for the brain to find words that are hidden in all kinds of other words that probably does us some good. So you take a word like that, you rearrange the letters, and hopefully this is helping the brain in one way or another, because you discover that there's things stuck in there. Trust me, this is really helping your brain. Okay. No matter whether it's physical activity or intellectual activity, you must stop. Your body must rest. This is really critically important. Now, let me show you why. At night, when you lie down to sleep, the first thing your brain says is, thank God. I thought he would never stop. And for the first, if you hooked up electroencephalograph leads to your brain, you find at the beginning of the night, it's slow wave sleep is predominating. What that means is the brain is taking all the experiences and all the things that people told you during the day, all the things you learned, and filing them away so that you can find them tomorrow. It's like a big messy desk, and your brain files stuff away. That's slow wave sleep. Words, facts are getting integrated. The second half of the night, that's when dreams really come in a big way. And dreams often have emotional loading. Your brain is going through REM sleep. It's integrating emotions. It's integrating physical skills like a musical instrument or tennis or golf, or whatever it is. That's when the body is integrating those things. So, what if you stay up all night, which we were doing when I was in medical school 3 times a week at the hospital. I didn't sleep at all. And what you discovered is, first of all, your memory was terrible. After about 3 days, you just couldn't remember anything unless you wrote it down. And secondly, your emotional control is not so high. You're grumpier all the time. And once people start getting a good night's sleep, their memory comes back. So what do? We can be on the screen all night long. We can be reading books. There are just so many reasons to stay awake that we're depriving our brain of the time it needs to rest. And there's a physical side of this. You remember that sausage maker I showed you? Cranking out the beta amyloid strands and those little meatballs that form in your brain? When you go to sleep at night, it turns off. Unless you stay awake. If you're up at night, the amyloid production machinery does not stop. You need to unplug and become unconscious for several hours at night, and then plug in again so that you can get your best the next day. So, my most important medical device is this one. I don't care how good the book is, even if it's my book, I don't care how good it is, I don't care what TV show you're watching. When the clock strikes 10, perfect time to just go to sleep. And get a good night's sleep, okay? By the way, if you have trouble sleeping, my book, Power Foods for the Brain, has a whole chapter on why we tend to have trouble sleeping, and it gives you a checklist for sorting it out, and it's really pretty easy to get back to the kind of sleep that you used to have when you were 10 years old. Okay, but wait, there's more. This is Dwayne Gravelin. Dwayne Gravelin is a doctor. He was also an astronaut in training at NASA in Florida. And he had an interesting experience. He was driving home from work, got out of his car in his driveway, and there was a woman standing at his front door. And she said, "Hi, Dwayne." And he looked at her, and she looked at him, and she said, "Dwayne." He said, "Can I help you?" She said, "Dwayne, I'm your wife." She put him back in the car. They drove to the emergency room. They said, his memory, he doesn't remember his own wife. And they started to discover all of these holes in his memory, and he realized he had effectively early dementia. What is this about? He was a young man, he was a healthy man, and the only thing they could think of is he had started taking a drug, Lipitor. This is the generic, atorvastatin. And Lipitor is a pretty safe drug. But they thought, well, let's stop it and see what happens. And his memory came back. But so did his high cholesterol. So they started the Lipitor again at just half the dose, and within a month his memory was wiped out, everything after age 13. The Lipitor is now in the trash. His memory gradually comes back, and Dr. Gravlin writes to the FDA and says, I've had an experience that I think you may wish to look into. And at first the answer was, wait, statins are among the safest drugs we have. Well, I mean, it's true. They can cause muscle toxicity, and they can cause liver toxicity, and they do cause weight gain, and they increase the risk of diabetes a little bit. But apart from that, they're mostly safe. It turned out that there were hundreds of people who developed a disease that looked just like Alzheimer's after taking statins, including people who were in nursing homes, rocking themselves, not knowing their own families, who cleared up completely and packed their bags and went home when they stopped the statin. Now, let me say, I am not suggesting that there is not a role for statins. There's an important role for statins. They can bring cholesterol down, and a low cholesterol level helps prevent Alzheimer's disease. But what I am going to argue is that 90% of people on statins do not need them. They are not suffering from a Lipitor deficiency. They've got a high cholesterol level because they're eating cheese, and they're eating bacon, and they're eating chicken, and they're part of a medical system that never prioritized tackling the problem. And we have to be able to look the patient in the eye saying, here's where this problem came from, let's solve it together. And of course the doctor himself or herself has to solve it in their own life. In the same way as a generation ago, all of us doctors had to take the tobacco package out of our pocket and throw it in the trash. They now have to do the same with bacon and chicken wings and all the other stuff so they can be good role models for their patients. So I'm happy to tell you that the FDA now does recognize that not only Lipitor but other statins can lead to cases of dementia. It's not common, it's uncommon. But when a patient has dementia, among the checklists of things that we need to look at are medications, and there's a whole bunch of them. If you ever had a colonoscopy, come out of the hospital, you get into the car, your loved one picked you up and they said, I hope it wasn't too painful. And you say, well, funny you say that, I can't remember anything. I remember walking in the hospital, I think I remember them handing me a gown, but after that it's just kind of a blur. The reason it's a blur is that they gave you something called Versed, which wipes out your memory banks from anything that happened in the room. They could have stood on the exam table and shouted hallelujah and played the saxophone, and you wouldn't have any recollection of any of it. Because if you didn't get that, you probably would never come back and have another one. I'm not suggesting that they are wrong frankly, nobody's going to cherish the photographs of their colonoscopy or the experience, but I would suggest that they ask you first, we will wipe out your memory, is that okay with you? After all, it's your brain, they don't tell you. So cholesterol medications, sleeping pills like Ambien. If you know anybody who ever took Ambien, common experience. Ambien is a very effective, extremely popular sleep-inducing drug. But if you happen to wake up, like a car goes by and the horn honks and you wake up, people on Ambien suddenly kind of want to party. It just kind of reduces inhibitions, and it makes you go to the refrigerator and see what's in there. If there's not much in there, you'll go to the store and get it. I knew a young man who woke up one morning to find his kitchen all filled with groceries. Without him realizing it, he had driven in the middle of the night to the grocery store and bought all of these things on impulse and ate half of them and then went back to sleep. This happens all the time on people on Ambien. There are helpful ways to get a good night's sleep without drugs. Anyway, there's many, many more. The point here is if a person has any change in memory function, any change in brain function at all, the very first thing you want to look at is what's new in the drug world. If there's a new combination, a new drug, that's suspect number one, okay? All right, so let's check our scorecard. Can I avoid bad fats? Can I?
Yes.
Yeah, easy. When you get away from the dairy and the meat, the trans fats and snack foods, they're mostly gone. Can I avoid excess metals? Now that I know where they are, yes. Can I eat vitamin-rich foods like vegetables and fruit? Yes, not so hard. Can I take vitamin B12? Sure. Can I get physical activity? Well, Yeah. If we schedule it, we can do it. Can I get mental stimulation? You're getting plenty. Can I get some sleep? Yes, you can. Make it a point. Can I be careful about medications? Yes. If you do all these things together, we are not going to wipe out Alzheimer's disease completely. But I am convinced that we can cut our risk by 80% or perhaps even more than that. I've got lots of resources I want to share with you. These are some of my books. This is my propaganda book, The Vegan Starter Kit. Really short and simple. You can give it to somebody and in 45 minutes they'll feel confident about it. Please do use our Kickstart for anybody who's new. You go online and you can get our iPhone or Android app for free. And for 21 days you get menus and recipes. And you can do it in Spanish, you can do it in English, and online it's also in Mandarin. And we have one for people from the Indian subcontinent. For doctors, please join us when Washington is at its most miserable in July. We'd love to have you there, get your 18 CME credits. Come see us at the Barnard Medical Center. And I have one more session tomorrow morning, 8:45, we'll talk about diabetes. Let me just finish real quick by sharing with you a story. I mentioned in an earlier session about my own mother, who was my most resistant patient. My mother had a high cholesterol level, and it took a whole lot of doing for her to actually try a plant-based diet. And it knocked her cholesterol down dramatically, just amazing. And my father had a horrible diet. Typical, he grew up on a farm, raising cattle, and so he didn't really want to eat in a healthy way, but he's from the generation where men don't know how to shop, or cook, or clean up. So my mother had orange cones all around the kitchen, and he never went in. And whatever she would eat, whatever she would prepare, he would eat. So I ended up having two vegan parents, but only one of them knew it. And anyhow, so they both did really, really well, and her cholesterol stayed really low. But then later on, they decided to move into what they would call a retirement home. One of these places where you sell your house, you get an apartment, and they kind of look after you. And in this particular retirement home, it was a really nice one, it was in Fargo. And I went there and visited them, and I was shocked. The cafeteria didn't have anything healthy. It was all chicken wings and steaks and so forth. And I sat down with the manager, and he said, oh, these people, first of all, they're old. They don't want to change their diets. And, why not give them the rewards of all the things that they've worked for? I said, what are you talking about? These people have all kinds of health problems. They want to be healthy if you'll help them. I don't think so. So I said, let me give a lecture. So, and I got to tell you, in an old folks' home, people will show up for the hand-down pirate. They'll show up for anything. So I'm going to give them a lecture about diabetes and whatnot. So I'm talking to them, and I'm laying out the power of a plant-based diet. And I said, the manager is in the back. If we could have a plant-based diet here, and you could try it, how many people would go for it? Every hand went up. I'd like to try that. I'd like to have that at least as an option. Well, I couldn't win that battle. And my parents, being very polite people, went off their plant-based diet and just decided, I don't want to make waves. I'll go ahead and eat the fish and the chicken. And pretty soon my mother's cholesterol went right back up. And she went on Lipitor. But her cholesterol still couldn't really go back down. And she ended up having more and more advancing symptoms, cardiovascular symptoms, and one day she was found dead on her kitchen floor. She had had a massive stroke. And about 6 months different in time, the same thing happened to my father. I am not suggesting that they were going to live forever. What I am suggesting is that there is not a single person in any nursing home, or any hospital, or any home, or any clinic, anywhere, who wouldn't take their pills and throw them in the trash if they really believed that healthy foods that they could make part of their lives would solve the problem for them. What we have now is a lack of knowledge, and among people who have little bits of knowledge, sometimes confusion, noise that comes from other areas, and a shortage of will because we imagine things to be harder than they really are. We have to change that. You all have knowledge that your friends back home don't have. To them, Alzheimer's is old age in genes. Heart disease means, well, I guess you're 50, you ought to have a heart attack. We have to change the knowledge base. We have to change the motivation. We have to change federal policies. All these things are big, but it starts, I think, not with finger wagging, but it starts with having that information and spreading it with other people. And now that's easier than it's ever been. You think of the people that you communicate, you can give them books, you can give them gifts, you can give them movies and DVDs, and just by email you can link them to things that they can watch that will change their lives. If you find a recipe or a food product that you like, let other people know, and then they'll pick it up, and through just the fun of shopping and testing and trying, we're sharing what ends up really being life-saving. In a typical doctor's day, they might see 20 patients and hopefully help some of them. But in your day, you'll reach dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people, and you'll never know how much impact you'll actually have. But I guarantee you, you'll save their lives, and I'm delighted to be doing that with you. Thank you so much.